Welcome back. Our topic now will be in more detail about this leadership crisis that our two guests are talking about. And let me note, Robert, you have written about these sort of latter-day barbarians, these people who are so completely self-interested, they're insatiably greedy, they are operating basically at the detriment of shareholders and at corporate success, and yet they thrive in these times. Discuss how they came to be and who are these people?
Well, it's again linked to the global crisis. So we have a leadership crisis. The two are symbiotic. When I talk about the latter-day barbarians, I'm talking about the central problem to the leadership crisis, in my humble opinion, and it's this. And my thesis is thus that for as long as we continue to appoint leaders based on the intelligence quotient and which college and school they went to and where they worked, not on whether they have the moral fortitude and the incredibly important qualities it takes to lead complex organizations. And for me, the soft issues of leadership are the hard issues. We haven't learned that lesson yet. So how do they get ahead? Well, these people, the latter-day barbarians I refer to, are extremely psychologically adroit. They are the masters of impression management. They walk into corporations, they know how to work the boardroom, they know which behaviors are rewarded, they imitate them, and Bob's your uncle. He or she is the next CEO. I've been rather simplistic. It's a lot more convoluted than that. But until we are less seduced by impression management, we're in this for the long haul.
It's interesting, Bill, isn't it? Because this has been going on for a long time, and careers have been ruined, companies have been ruined, and yet that is the model that seems to be what boards are looking for when they're picking their leaders.
I said earlier, they're looking for the wrong thing. But beyond that, I think when they go outside, it's almost impossible as a board member to know what you're really getting, because the person comes in and makes an impression. I had chairman of one very large company said, I'm not proud of this, but I had our board had 1 hour with the candidate, then a 3-hour dinner, and we chose them. That's all they know. They don't know anything.
So they're going by almost how much they like the person, how much
they
they
have no idea how psychologically well-grounded. That's why I'm a big advocate of grooming people from within, where you really get to know them over a long, and boards of directors have to get to know them as well. And you get to know people, you get to see how they do. You test them in 2 ways. I like to test them by throwing them out into a huge pond. Like, why don't you go to Korea? Take over our Korean subsidiary. I know the revenues are 100th of what you're managing now. We'll see how you do. But beyond that.
Now, if they balk at that, that's an indicator.
Yeah. And if they fail, maybe they haven't failed. Maybe it's been a great learning. But our dean at Harvard, Noria, says, I like it like Lincoln. I want to test them with success. See how they handle this success. Do they have such a craving for success? They'll do anything to keep it going, including abusing their people, including trimming up the accounting, which is pretty illegal. And yeah, they will, and then you don't want them. So you need to know their character at a deep level to a series of tests. You don't know someone until they face crisis. Don't let them face the crisis when they get to be CEO. I saw this happen at a company I used to work for, and the CEO missed a quarter, and he panicked, and he sold the company down the river. He destroyed a 110-year-old company for no gain, okay? Because he panicked, because he wasn't into himself. He couldn't accept the idea of failure. Hey, missing a quarter is something that happens to the best of us.
Robert, it's hard to align yourself with the kinds of principles you're talking about that CEO should be following when you do feel those pressures of the quarterly reports, if analysts are beating up on you. It's hard to stand by your principles if the voices all around you are saying, do this, stop doing it the way you're doing it.
It is difficult, but then we do expect individuals who lead very responsible organizations. It's a responsible job, need to be anchored in their own identity. The pressures aren't new. It's not a postmodern phenomenon. But we aren't necessarily developing and selecting the best people for the right role. The data is there. The mechanisms are there. I believe that too many boards take the shortcuts. And I know I'm being critical, but I've seen too much carnage. And until we bring discipline back into the boardroom, and if we take a little bit longer, and we apply the science that is at our disposal to determine the best match, best suit, we'll have less of this carnage. And it's interesting, if you look at the last 12 months, so if we go back and we go back to the dot-com bubble, Enron, Adelphi, WorldCom 2002, we fast-tracked to Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers 2008, the current economic nadir upon us. What have we learned? This year there's a litany of CEO failures and board dysfunctionality. I won't cite names, but rogue trading, money laundering, bribery and corruption, curriculum vitae irregularities, and so on and so on. And so the question that does go begging is, when will we ever learn? Back to the global economic crisis. Hence our calling today, Bill and I, is we have to determine the root cause and we have to find the solutions now.
Or
it's going to get to a point of Armageddon. And so I say to all the smart men and women out there, if in 12 months we've generated a list of some 18 or 19 corporate dysfunctionalities across the board, then what have we learned? And as we do know, there are some wonderful people out there, but we're not coordinated, we're not socially cohesive. Bill's doing great work at Harvard, many other people are doing magnificent work, but we're not approaching this in a singular, cohesive fashion to arrest the rot.
is it being enabled in any way by government, would you say? That the regulators are asleep at the switch, they have the wrong kinds of regulations in place?
You can't regulate leadership, and we've tried. Now that's part of the failure, by getting a box checking for boards. So they're spending 2-3 hours at board meeting on ministerial duty instead of talking about the real positions. How's our current leader doing in executive session? Who are the future candidates to come up behind this person? And at Harvard, we teach courses for, as I mentioned, for new CEOs, but also for senior executives who are in big leadership roles today and may take on bigger ones. And it's all about, how do you stay grounded as a human being? You are a human, you're no different than anyone else. You're not some exalted person. How do you stay grounded in yourself? That's what Robert's talking about, identity. How do you stay true to who you are? You are not your title. And how do you stay grounded in your family? What practices do you have in place to make sure you stay true to yourself, to your true north, as I wrote in my book by that name, so that you stay on course of what you believe and you don't get seduced by all the money, fame, and power. I've seen so many CEOs get seduced by big newspaper articles, by the promise of huge amounts of short-term money, and they'll cut corners by having the power over other people. I said, it's not about the power. It's about empowering other people to step up and lead.
Do you think the compensation formula has to be changed?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Compensation program. If you're hired to do a long-term job, why are we compensating you for the short term? What does the stock price have to do with it? There's no correlation short term. Long term there is. So yes, I'm chairman of a compensation committee of one of the world's largest companies. 75% of your compensation is withheld until retirement or 10 years, whichever is the greater, and you have to work that off. And so and if you choose a bad successor, it's going to rebound right back to you, because company's going to go downhill after you leave. So you're highly motivated to make the right long-term decisions.
Is that an easy sell to that board?
It's been around for some time, and it's sold by results, because they're making decisions. But you can see how it influences. You put that same person, we're going to measure you by quarterly results. You have a bad quarter, you're out. What do you think people are going to do? Where do you think corruption comes from? Okay? And then you're glamorized. You know, Dan Vassallo is an outstanding CEO of Novartis, once said, you know, you start to get this craving for success. It's not so much a fear of failure, and you're so successful that all of a sudden you start to think that the person at the center of all of this champagne toasting is yourself. Man, I did it. I may have 50,000 people, but man, look what I did. Nonsense. You have to stay grounded in yourself and have that humility.
Yeah, it does feed the ego, though. All the baubles that come along with being a CEO.
If you have an ego that's fed by those things, you probably shouldn't be in the job. But to Robert's point, we've put a lot of people like that in the job. He's seen a lot and worked with a lot of people, big ego people, and they can be a disaster.
Absolutely. I mean, they destroy shareholder value. They destroy communities. You know, I was recently involved in a very difficult board situation, And one was being asked, we were having a conversation, why now? Why do we have to confront this particular problem? And even at board level, so if we take this conversation, we link it back to the global economic crisis, to the leadership crisis. And Bill's point, you can't regulate leadership, but there is a leadership crisis in the regulatory framework. But in this particular board situation, I was calling upon the directors to say, the reason you need to address the particular situation that has reached such a dire stage is we have to think of our communities. It's not just the stock price, as Bill was alluding to. There are communities, there are various stakeholders. So it is almost as if in 2012 we have to educate boards of directors to do right.
Well, we will be talking about that issue of corporate governance in our next segment, so I hope you'll stay around for that.